traced Philip's family tree and discovered that his ancestors were hard-working grafters from the north. How things have changed.
Well, it's Fern's turn now. Genealogist Anthony Adolph has spent the past 6 months searching for some Great Britons.
One way to start tracing your family tree is to speak to as many living relatives as you can and see what they can tell you about your ancestors. Well, I've come here to meet Fern's second cousin Kate and Kate's aunt Peggy to see what they can tell me to help me start my quest. And the first relative I'm interested in is Fern's great-grandfather, Charles Britton. Well, Peggy, we've been investigating Fern's family tree, and we know that Charles Britton was her great-grandfather,
Yeah.
and he's just a name to us, but I gather you actually remember him.
Oh, yes. Well, he was a very kind man. He loved animals. He was very smart, always. He always had on a collar, tie and a diamond tie pin. He dressed like that when he got up.
So he was a real gentleman.
Oh,
wasn't
well,
he?
yes.
One of my jobs is to find out when Charles was born, and I was hoping you might be able to give me a clue.
Well, we think it was 1851 or possibly 1850, but we're waiting for you to tell us that.
Well, that's a great head start, though. And he looks to me like quite an intelligent, quite an educated man.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, he loved Shakespeare.
Oh, yes.
He had the whole works, and he had a quotation from Shakespeare for every occasion, and they put a quotation from Shakespeare on his tombstone.
After speaking to Peggy and Kate, I went to the Family Records Centre in London and found out that Fern's great-grandfather, Charles Britton, was born on the 21st of October, 1851. But I was also intrigued about the Shakespeare quotation on his grave, so I travelled to St Barnabas's Church in Erdington, Birmingham, where Peggy told me he was buried. And if I remember rightly, she said the grave was around the back.
Aha! Wow! Here it is! The Britton family vault. And look, there's Charles Britton there, died on the 8th of April 1932. And here is the very Shakespeare quote that Peggy told me about. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed up in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, "This was a man." It's marvellous. It's a quote from the end of Julius Caesar. And so we know that Charles Britton really loved his Shakespeare. But apart from that, who was this man, Charles Britton? What was life really like for him? He would have been dressed like this. And this is the kind of car he would have driven. Well, actually, his chauffeur Gibbs drove it for him. Drive on, Gibbs. Charles Britton was a self-made man. I'm on my way now to the street where his factory was in the early 1900s. Birmingham was renowned for its metalwork right from the start of the Industrial Revolution, and Charles built a successful business making something called magnetos, a component for cars and aeroplanes. He eventually became one of Birmingham's leading industrialists. We're in Drew's Lane, and this is where Fern's great-grandfather, Charles Britton, had his magneto factory. But it wasn't just magnetos that helped Charles make a bob or two. He was an entrepreneur. He was a man who took risks. He foresaw the bicycle boom coming in the 19th century, and he invented a pump, the Britton bicycle pump. One risk that paid off. But things weren't always that good for Charles. Bye, Gibbs.
He was the eldest son of William and Frances Britton. They were a working-class family who lived in a small terraced house. Life was pretty grim, and this made the ambitious Charles determined to move on to something better. This is Cardigan Street, where Charles Britton lived in the 1850s. As you can see, the houses have been demolished, and the old working-class communities have long since moved on and have been replaced with light industry. From the census, I managed to find out that William Britton, that's Charles Britton's father and Fern's great-great-grandfather, was born in 1820 and was a spectacle maker. He lived and worked in a Vauxhall Street in Aston, Birmingham. Vauxhall Street. Now, where is it?
Oh dear, well, I've been trying to find out where Vauxhall Street was using these old maps and a new one. and I've found it, but unfortunately they've knocked it down and turned it into Aston University. However, there is something interesting here. They've named one of their buildings Vauxhall House. So in other words, they've named it after the street where Fern's family used to live. And there it is.
William's father and Fern's great-great-great-grandfather was also called William Britton, and he was a military ornament maker in the early 19th century. Information on this William is quite hard to find, although I did discover something interesting. This is St Philip's Cathedral in Birmingham, and this is where, on the 12th of May 1799, Fern's great-great-great-grandfather, William Britton, the military ornament maker, was baptised. I am near the end of my journey, but I have managed to trace back one further generation to Fern's great-great-great-great-grandfather. And yes, you guessed it, his name was William Britton. This is Freeman Street, where William Britton lived during the 1790s. There's nothing left there now to give me a sense of how Fern's ancestors lived, but I really want to know what life was like for William. Luckily, I know just the place to go to.
It's like stepping back in time. This is a restored back-to-back house in Birmingham, and it's just like the one William lived in Freeman Street. You can just imagine him and his family gathered round the fire here on a cold winter's night. Ah, the bedroom. Look at that, 3 beds. But probably the whole family would have been sort of squashed into those 3 beds. And, the work table. Now, William was a gilt button maker, and this comes from the jewellery quarter of Birmingham, and these were just the sort of instruments that William would have used making his gilt buttons. Aren't they marvellous? Well, who would have thought that the Britton family could have risen in only a few generations to a life of luxury from such humble beginnings as these?
Fireplace, you were lucky. Wow.
That's fantastic. And that photograph of my great-grandfather looks very like my grandfather, his son.
Good.
Who I knew, of course, when he was in his 90s. So, yes, he looked very similar.
Yes.
How fabulous. Thank you very much.
And he really did have a chauffeur called Gibbs.
He actually did, yes, because Peggy, who is your father's cousin,
Yes.
who's, I wouldn't say how old she was, almost a century actually, remembers Charles Britton. So she remembers someone who was born in 1851, which I think is incredible. And she was able to tell us so much about him, including little details like the fact that there was a chauffeur called Gibbs.
Well, it was lovely to see Peggy and Kate as well,
Yes.
because that's a side of the family I know nothing about.
Yes, because they saw, when I was on in September, they saw me talking about your family tree, so they contacted us and
Yes.
said, well, actually, we've got all these old photos and wonderful. They've got marvellous stuff about
Because
your
that's
family.
really important,
Wonderful.
isn't
Well,
it?
thank you.
Tap the memories of the
Yes.
elder members of your family before that information is lost forever.
Absolutely, exactly, and not just your sort of parents and grandparents, but in that case, you know, your father's cousins and more distant relatives, because they even had a postcard saying that Charles Britton met his wife in the Isle of Man. It doesn't say why, but they happened to be and it says this is where my parents met, and so
Good
just
heavens.
fantastic little details.
What
How
would we have done
wonderful.
without you? Gilt buttons, bicycle pumps, spectacles? Well, the world would have come apart if it hadn't been for the Great Britons of the past.
I haven't really lived up to expectations, have I? But what I'm interested in is these little toy soldiers.
Yes, because the Britons gave us more. What did the Britons do for us? Well, you've heard of Britain's toy soldiers. I mean,
No.
I used to play with them when I was little. Yeah, here they are. That's a modern
But
one.
that says Britain,
It's a
and I'm
different
double T-O-N.
It's a different spelling. Now, when I was tracing your family tree, as you do with family trees, there are lots of different spellings. In the old days, they wrote names down different ways, and Britain was one of the ways in which the family was spelled. And the earliest ancestor you've got there, he had another grandson called, guess what? William Britton, yes, who lived also under where Aston University is. It was really close to where your family were.
Yeah.
And he made toy soldiers. And it took off, it became successful. This is an old one. This is worth about £600 now. And so I'll be pocketing that one. And he moved down to London. The firm became really successful. It got taken over by Americans. It's now a multinational. It's based in China now, which is where those are made. And they're making millions of soldiers all over the world. And they are definitely your family. They are the British.
So where did
We
the
should
money
be claiming
go?
royalties.
Where did the money
This
go?
is £600, and they're going
Yes.
to be up for auction soon, aren't they?
Absolutely, yep. Yeah.
£600 each.
Each, yes.
I suppose you can't buy them individually, can you?
We just,
Well, I don't
just
know.
ask for the
Or
horse.
just the, yes. Or the hat.
That's lovely.
Well,
so how
that's-
old is that one?
I think it's about 60 years. I'm not quite sure. Actually, on the
60
age,
years.
but,
So not made by a Britain family
oh, yes,
member.
the family. Oh, they only sold the family. Only sold the firm. I gather comparatively recently, and there's still some.
I
They
knew
didn't let
nothing
you in.
about that.
They didn't let you in on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another branch of the family, but they're all
Well,
entrepreneurs. I mean, they're all up there in Birmingham with their metalwork, the military connections, all really sort of going for it and making their money in different ways. And your family made it through the bicycle pumps and the magnetos for the airplanes, and then they chose another route.
There's an article in one of the papers today. This one here, £50 to trace your DNA, going much, much, much further back than we've been able to go with our family tree, back to the tribes that make up these everybody coming from the same tribes.
Yes, I mean, basically, we're all related, obviously, but DNA enables you to find out which sort of branch of the human family tree, if you like, they came from. And it's a new project, just launched by National Geographic, just in the papers this morning, mapping where all the DNA is now, because, of course, as the world is mixing up and everyone's moving around, all the DNA that used to be in one particular place is now being diluted, so they're sort of capturing it before it's lost. I mean, if we'd done a DNA test on you, Philip, with what I was talking about yesterday, I wouldn't be surprised if you had maybe some Viking DNA, which we could test. But we only know what Viking DNA is because because we know what Scandinavian DNA is. But as the world mixes up, the Scandinavians are moving to America and other people moving into. So you wouldn't be able to find out what the original DNA was like. So we're doing it now, not leaving it till later.
Oh, that sent shivers down my spine then. Suddenly I feel like nicking all your furniture.
What's that longboat doing coming up the Thames?
We love the idea of being a Viking.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Yes.
And you've got our scrolls there, our family tree scrolls.
These are very nicely produced family trees. That's your one, Philip.
Thank
That's
you.
yours. And Fern, there's your
Thank you
family
very
tree.
much.
I think I've got that the right way around.
Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, Anthony, and thank you for that.
Well, it's been really fascinating.
So, tips for everybody: talk to the family.
Absolutely, yes.
Look on the internet.
Yes, trace as many. I'll say, don't just trace just ask your immediate family, but trace your distant cousins, because they're the ones that could have the secrets to the toy soldier. They could have the family Bible. They could have some old pictures. And you can't really go too distant. Well, you can. You should go as distant as possible, because they're the ones who could have the really interesting.
That's
stuff.
Brilliant.
Fascinating.
Thank you
so
very
much,
much
Anthony.
It's been
a
great fun
wonderful
doing it.
journey.
Really enjoyed
We've
doing
loved
it. Yeah.
Brilliant. So for further information about tracing your family, send a standard address envelope to Family Trees, PO Box 446, Stockport, SK5 7W.